women have made more progress in basketball than they have in broadcasting.
Cathy Hughes built Radio 1 with raw talent, dedication, and perseverance.
My stations are merely vehicles to provide employment to African American broadcasters. Where else would they work?
Cathy Hughes, up next on Basic Black.
Cathy Hughes is at the controls of the largest black-owned broadcasting company in the nation. She owns Radio 1, a conglomerate of radio and TV stations across the country, which now include Boston's WILD and Hot 97.7 FM. Hughes credits her faith and love for her son Alfred as the catalyst for building Radio 1.
The day that my son was put in my arms by the doctor, my whole life changed, because for the first time in my life, I had a mission, a purpose much larger than myself.
At that time, Hughes was only 17, but was determined not to have her son become another statistic. She worked various radio jobs in Washington, including running errands at a low-power AM station, which she later bought as her first enterprise. To keep costs down, the new owner slept on the floor of the station. For 18 months, Hughes washed in the public restroom until she could afford a full-time staff. In 1999, she became the first black woman to take a company public. Today, she and her son Alfred, now the CEO, are running a $3 billion business. Tonight, a personal portrait of a woman determined to pioneer her very own media empire. Good evening, everyone. I'm Darren Duarte with another installment in our Basic Black Conversation series. And joining us tonight is Cathy Hughes, Radio 1 chairperson and founder. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Life is good now, isn't it?
Life has always been good.
Has life always been good?
I've been blessed with 55 years so far, and every one gets more glorious than the one before.
You bought one station. Your company has how many stations now?
65 radio and 1 television.
You're considered a radio mogul, if you will.
I hate that term. What does that mean?
I was going to ask you that.
I hate the term because, number one, for some reason, people who are introducing me at speaking engagements or whatever just seem, they can't resist the introduction of the largest black-owned media company in America. Now, we were number 2 before BET was sold. Once they became Viacom-owned, we moved up to number 1. I would have loved to have beat them fair and square, but by default, I got elevated to, okay. So people, biggest black, please do not applaud. I have 65 radio stations. My number 1 competitor is Clear Channel. They have 1,100. That's like a goldfish fighting a whale. So often in the black community, my grandmama used to say, you can't fall off the floor. So an itsy-bitsy step sometimes looks so much larger in the black community than it really is.
But you think then African Americans should not either give credit or give credence to someone if no one else has done it? Take your company. You are the biggest one now. You think they shouldn't mention it, or it's the way that they do it?
It's the joy that they take in it. I don't want them to celebrate it. I'm not saying they shouldn't mention it. I thank God for the recognition, and I thank them, but I don't want them to rejoice in it. There's nothing to rejoice over yet. I mean, there's no comparison between the 2 competitors, Clear Channel and Radio 1. I have 65 stations.
Now, do you want to one day get to that point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I think everyone works towards.
Well, sometimes some business people say, I've got so much I can handle. I don't think I can handle anymore. I mean, there's some.
Oh, I would never say that because, I see radio stations as just the vehicles that God allows me to use to open the door of opportunity for broadcasters. If there were no Radio 1, I have close to 2,000 employees now. 1,400 of them are African American broadcasters. So if there were not a Radio 1, where would these 1,400 brothers and sisters get employment?
You mentioned before that once you got to the point where you had 1,000 African Americans on the payroll.
Yes, I did. I stopped. Yes, absolutely.
I signed
each check. And now my goal is 2,500. My goal is 2,500 African American broadcasters. And if the
look
good
at my-
Lord blesses me with 2,500, I'm going to up it again. Because, as I said, my stations are merely vehicles to provide employment opportunities to African American broadcasters. Where else would they work?
Is that what one of the passions that drive you in this business?
Oh, it's totally what's driving me now. However, it's much rougher now. It is much more difficult for an African American broadcaster to survive in this environment because of consolidation and syndication.
Tell me something in the comments that drives you, that motivates you, that pushes you to be better.
All the money, not all the money, but the majority of the big salaries. And it's probably almost all, it's about 95 percent of all of your big salaried air personalities are morning drive hosts. And because that's when people are more receptive, that's when
Higher
your audience...
advertising revenue.
Exactly, all right? And so when you realize that, then you realize that if you don't open the door of opportunity... I was naive when I got into management. It was Christmas morning, and the Washington Post style section headline read, "First Woman GM in Nation's Capital." And I was like, wow, who? And I started to read it. And in Howard University's customary way of doing things, they hadn't bothered to tell me. They were going to tell me after the Christmas break. Some type of way the Washington Post found out. I think someone in personnel had called them because they had put the papers through, and they were going to surprise me after Christmas break. So I'm reading, and then I get down to my name, and I almost faint because I don't realize it's me. They have interviewed me. I know that I'm in the running for it, but they had not officially said, "You are the first woman general manager, you've got the job." And so I read it in the paper. I'm all naive and innocent. I'm thinking, wow, women are going through this door. They're going to be women general managers, women news directors, women program directors. And I thought that, it would be almost like a WNAB, a Women's National Association of Broadcasters. There's a WNBA. And I just testified before the FCC a few weeks ago, and I said women have made more progress in basketball than they have in broadcasting. And that's the truth. And even the commissioners themselves had to chuckle because that's the God's honest truth. So I thought, black folks and women, here we go. We're off and running. 20 years passed, and I looked behind me, and I was alone. And even though several had made it through some type of way, they were eliminated, and now a woman owner, women general managers are few and far between, but they exist.
What do you
but
think
when
about
you talk about a woman owner, it's me.
What do you think about when you see that? Because some people might say, you know what, Miss Hughes, yeah, it's hard, but maybe they're going after other things. The line you hear a lot of times when people can't hire black folk, it's, well, we don't find anybody qualified. There's no one there who to take up this reign. What do you say to that? What do you feel about that?
I say that that's a bunch of bunk because women want the same opportunities that men want. And I think that the reality is that whether it's you, me, or Joe Blow or Sally Smith, all of us who labor in the vineyards of broadcasting all want ultimately the top prize.
Let me stop you right there for a second, and let's back up a little bit. Here we are, I know present day, but take me back to the time when you were a teenager, a single mother, you divorced your husband. When you think about that now, what perspective does that give you on your life today? Or do you ever think about it?
No.
No?
No, and not compare it. People zero in. They like to turn it into a Horatio Alger story. They really love the part, not so much about me being 17. And back in those days, you were really an outcast in black communities if your baby didn't have his daddy's name. That was the thing, the baby's name. That last name was critical because I was just being a wild, experimenting teenager. I was not in love or ready for the rest. But the story that they really love is the one where I slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. Oh, this is Horatio Alger. She, lost everything. Well, number one, I'm like Nikki Giovanni wrote about in her poetry of years ago. I didn't know it was a struggling time. I was having fun. Courting in a sleeping bag is far more exciting than in a bedroom, okay? Nobody can get away, okay? Cooking on the hot plate, I didn't have dishes, all right? I had one pot. And when you're really doing something that's fulfilling and something that's challenging and something that really turns you on, you don't see the hard times. And the hardest time for me, quite frankly, was none of what people write about. The hardest time for me was when I left Howard University and I went with another broadcast corporation that did not have the resources to pay my staff, and I used all of my retirement money that I had pulled out of Howard when I left to pay my staff, because thank God to this day as I sit here in front of you, I've never had a check bounce and I've never had an employee go unpaid. And I used all my money, and then they weren't able to come up with operating funds, and they asked me to shop a loan, and I told them that if I shopped a loan for them, that I was entitled to an equity position. And these people had been together for like almost 30 years trying to get this radio station on the air, which I finally did for them. And so they thought I was being arrogant. I was, in my 30s, and the youngest one was about 68. All right, these were
This is prior
70.
to WOL time.
Yes, this is prior to WOL. And so they said, well, if you think you're so smart, why don't you just leave and go get your own station? And I said, fine, because I am not going to go out and get financing for you and your station. That's not what a general manager does. A general manager receives a budget and operates the station within that budget. And during that period, no one would even give me an interview, because one of the things in broadcasting is if you hiccup the wrong way and find yourself on the sideline,
Word gets around.
Word
and your
gets
reputation.
around, exactly, and trying to get back in is the hardest challenge. And those were the most difficult times for me, because I was demoralized. I really questioned whether or not I was really as good a broadcaster as I believed in my heart. I had taken a station that had been dark for 24 years and gotten it on the air. I had completely recruited and hired a staff. I had created successful formats.
What you said?
And I was unemployed.
Were you second guessing yourself? And if so, you sat home and said what? You said,
I didn't sit home. I was on the phone. I was trying to make appointments. And when I couldn't get through on the phone, I went in person. Remember, I had trained sales staffs. I went to individuals that I thought were my colleagues, if not my friends. Some of them I did consider friends. I sat in a lobby in New York City at a major black broadcast organization and heard my friend, who was the secretary to the GM, say, I had Cathy Hughes come up because, she's not working right now, and I thought you might want to talk to her. And I heard this gentleman say, why in the hell would I want to talk to Cathy Hughes? She wasn't smart enough to hold on to her last job. I don't want to hire her. And I left before my friend came. It's about to make me cry now, because I didn't want my friend to see. I knew that she was going to be hurt. But it hurts me to this day to even tell you this story. During this time, the only person that extended a hand of friendship to me was Peppy Sutton at Inner City Broadcasting. Peppy Sutton at Inner City Broadcasting called him and said, hey, I hear you on the beach. Okay, take off your swimwear and get up here, because I'm putting a station on the air in Detroit. It was when Inner City first branched out of New York, and they went into Detroit with WLBS, which was the inverted,
BLS,
right, exactly, of BLS. And Peppy Sutton is the only person in this country who gave me a job, and guess what? He was the only one I hadn't called and asked.
wow. Cathy, you have an incredible story. Incredible story. I was telling folks before how when I came to Washington in college, I used to listen to you on WOL AM. You had the talk show, and talk to us about what you were striving for then. It was political empowerment was a big thing with you at the time.
The first thing I like to talk about is the fact that you and so many other young people approach me, and you're no longer young yourselves, and you go, oh, I grew up listening to you, Miss Hughes. When we were blessed with the opportunity to buy WOL, we did what's called a format search. And what we discovered was that the one thing that was missing out of Washington radio was information from an African and African-American perspective. So when I'm asked what was I trying to do, I was trying to fill that void. I was trying to be the voice of the community.
So you were reaching out to them?
I was reaching out. My core foundation for Radio 1 is what we call the WOL family, which was my first station. My call letters were WOL, which meant we offer love. And my whole motivation, my whole philosophy and emphasis was to provide for the D.C. local community an outlet and a voice. And still, to this day, I've taken that same philosophy, that same corporate strategy, and tried to do the same thing in every market that we're in. You're always going to hear about the high achievers. You're always going to hear about black intelligentsia, but that's not what makes black America great. And it is a minuscule number compared to the masses. When you use the term the masses, people start thinking welfare recipients and homeless and crack addicts. That's not the group I'm talking about. I'm talking about the average, everyday brother and sister who work, go to church on Sunday, rear wonderful families, are active in their communities, and you never hear about them.
Give me an example of when you knew that you were on the right track with that information and power for black Americans, especially in Washington.
I knew I was on the right track when, in radio, Arbitron is the Bible in terms of ratings. And advertisers buy radio based on the Arbitron ratings. I had no Arbitron ratings. And I was in serious trouble from day one, because day one, the first 12 months of the existence of my talk format, not only was I struggling to convince white advertisers that they should place ads on my station, but I was also struggling with black intelligentsia in Washington, D.C., many of whom were as concerned and as anxious about a, quote, talk format from a black perspective as their white counterparts. They didn't want to be embarrassed. They didn't want ignorance on the air, quote unquote.
Now you say that. Are there any people came to you and asked you not to do this?
Oh,
or did they not want to come on your radio show?
Oh, absolutely. They refused. Some members of the D.C. power structure resisted coming on for years. It was not until I was their only option. So often, the only time we saw some of the power brokers in D.C. was when they were getting fired or being investigated by the government, and then all of a sudden they ran to the black community. My first indication was, I'm on the air, and one of the things I think that really kind of caught on and bonded me and my show with the community, I was totally honest. I said, listen, I've got college professors telling me that I shouldn't be doing this because it's going to embarrass black Washington. I have advertisers telling me that it's going to be too radical, and black people really just want entertainment from radio. They don't want information. And I said, I am going to perish unless those of you who are out there, who are receptive and are embracing what I'm trying to do, you've got to speak up. The next thing I knew, my audience, without any input from me, started having their checks printed. We listen to talk radio WOL. So all of a sudden I get a call from the electric company, and they're like, why are we getting all these checks in with our bills saying that we listen to WOL? They didn't even tell me. And they just talked to each other. And all of a sudden the utility companies, the mortgage companies, they started getting thousands of checks that had printed on the top, down in the memo pad, all over the check, WOL, WOL. I said, thank you, Lord, because I knew then that the train had started to move down the track, and there was no stopping it.
And then advertisers started coming in more so
absolutely.
after that too? Ms. Hughes, you must have some drive even back then, because that's pretty risky. Listening to what other people said, you didn't want to hear that. You said, I'm going to go forward with this kind of programming. You didn't have the ratings, at least not on paper, but something you knew, what, in your heart or both?
I knew I was on a mission.
And that mission was?
To disseminate information to the African American community and to tell our story from our perspective.
I can see it wasn't easy for you, and people say it's not easy to live the American dream. But a lot of times you hear people in America saying, look at Cathy Hughes, she's done it. Why can't the rest of black America or the rest of everybody else? What do you say to them?
Everybody can't do it. And that's a fallacy, and I think that's really, really an injustice for us to tell our young people that. So I don't lie to young people and tell them, I did it, so can you. No. But that doesn't mean you can't do that which is important to you. My child was important to me, and my child having a future was important to me. That's how I got the career. I wasn't concentrating on a career for me. I was concentrating on my child, Alfred Liggins, not being a black statistic because he had a mother who at 16 did not know that Norforms were deodorant and not contraceptives. And at 17 brought him into this world. But it was never about trying to push myself forward.
Can I stop you right there and talk to you about your son, Alfred Liggins?
Yes, Alfred Charles Liggins III.
There's a story when your company, Radio 1, went for its initial public offering, selling stock to shareholders, you saw something at an airport.
I'm in New York feeling even more grateful to God and excited than I was the day he was born. I was like, oh my goodness, to stand here and watch my son. His CFO, Scott Royster, is a young, highly accomplished African-American guy like him, and to see these young black men standing here on Wall Street with all of these brokers and analysts and everyone giving them a standing ovation for their accomplishment, my heart was just bursting with pride. And Credit Suisse, our underwriter, we had a conference to go to that we had already committed to months before that same afternoon. And so they said, take the company jet. As we're coming down the runway to park, right next to us is this 747 full of prisoners. And it had to be 100 degrees in the sun, and they were all shackled and handcuffed to each other, standing in a line waiting to be boarded on this 747. It must have been 350 of them, and they were all black.
All black?
And to see them, I mean, perspiration was just pouring off their bodies, and they're shackled with their hands and their feet. And I grabbed my son's hand, and I grabbed Scott's hand, and I said, let's get on our knees, because there, before the grace of God, goes you and Scott. And they looked out the window, and they just gasped, because this morning we were on Wall Street, and we were experiencing something that those brothers don't even understand even exist. The majority, and I said to them, the blessing that we received this morning carries with it a very special responsibility to those men that you see standing in the line. The other thing, I don't think there was anyone in that line over 30, 35 years old. They were all their same age.
Have you ever had any fears through your life, knowing what you were putting yourself through? You made sure that, A, you did not want your son to be a statistic. But did you have any fears going through this process? None?
No. And it's funny that you would ask me that, because someone said that to me this weekend. Someone said the thing that's been consistent throughout your whole 55 years is that you don't know that cowardice is not a word that exists in your spirit. I think that that's the blessing of really liking who I am and liking my people.
There are things that have been written or said about you before in the past from your critics that if you do, yet you do hold a grudge on somebody or on people. Marion Barry, for instance, former mayor of D.C., you supported him. You had listeners supporting him while he was in prison, and he gave his first interview or an interview to a competing station, and word was that you pulled the plug at least on the support you had for him. Is that accurate?
No.
No?
I never supported Marion Barry. I've always had a great amount of disdain. As I told you, I supported the local community, and they love him. To this day, they love him, and he just got busted again a few weeks ago. Okay, I mean, seriously. I had to do what they thought was right. But I said to them, now he's messing with my business. All right, he was accused of having oral sex in the jailhouse. We called him and said, I'm not going on the media, and then gave a interview to our white competitor, claiming that he hadn't had the oral sex, the guards had lied, and all of this. And I said, so my competition got the listeners, because all my listeners ran over there to hear, did he do it or didn't he do it? I said, that's messing with my business, and it was a way for me to legitimately exit stage right, as the cartoons say. I was never a supporter of Marion Barry.
As a businesswoman, you just mentioned a pure, almost a business decision, but also what was in your heart regarding the Marion Barry situation. But there was a time, too, in Maryland, a state senator you thought was getting a bum deal from the legislature.
Not thought, knew.
And you gave back a $500,000 loan
Absolutely.
back to the state.
Absolutely. Told him to put it where it came from, a fund called the Sunshine Fund. I told him, take this $500,000 and put it in a fund where the sun don't shine. Okay.
Now, some people would think...
First black legislator. Now, this is a state that had Spiro Agnew, Mandel, Marvin Mandel. Okay, this is a state that put the C in the word political corruption. Okay. First time in 200 years a black legislator had ever been put out of the state legislature. And this brother was accused by the newspaper, 14-count indictment, went to court, was found innocent of all counts. They even changed the venue. They moved him from Baltimore, where he would have had a black jury, to Arundel County, where he had one African American on his jury, an all-white jury for all practical purposes, found him innocent. And they're going to give me $500,000, what I called hush mouth money. I said, no, 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 you just opened my mouth. First time in the history of my company, I simulcast on all 8 radio stations at the same time because I did not want one elected official in the state of Maryland to miss my message. This brother was in line to be the Speaker of the House. It would have been the first time in the history of the state of Maryland an African American had ever been Speaker of the House. So 4 months before it's time for him to be elevated to the highest position, all these charges in the newspaper. No evidence, no nothing. Okay, flawless record. Even those who were accusing him said that he was the most effective lawmaker this state had ever seen. And what did they do? They cast him aside. So I told them they could keep their money. I could not possibly. I told them it was lynch party money and blood was dripping from the dollar bills, and I would not put it in my bank account and let it corrupt the rest of my hard-earned dollars. Yeah. So my son, we had to give him oxygen. He recovered. Okay, all right. Because he's pure. He had an MBA from Wharton. He was like, oh, no, she didn't. Okay. Because he was listening the same time. All right. So after we revived Alfred, everything got back to normal.
Okay, Cathy Hughes, I want to thank you for being our guest on Basic Black.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was an honor to be here with you today.
Thank you.
For questions and comments, please contact our website at wgbh.org, keyword Basic Black.
Who would you like for me to do a video on next? What are your thoughts about this video? Please share them in the comments. Please be honest when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.